Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. All eyes have been on the DUP for weeks, waiting for Sir Geoffrey Donaldson to make his move. As the party faithful gather in Belfast, we'll hear from the man in the spotlight.
I don't feel under any pressure. I am very relaxed about the position we are in.
One of the keenest observers of the situation here is the US government. I'll be speaking live to Washington's ambassador to the UK. And with me to offer their insight and analysis, Professor John Tong from the University of Liverpool and Sam McBride from the Belfast Telegraph and Sunday Independent. For political parties, the annual conference season presents a good opportunity to grab some airtime, make a few headlines and remind voters what they stand for. That's not something the DUP's been overly concerned about recently, of course. The party's hardly been out of the headlines. Instead, it's been front and centre of the debate as the wait goes on for its leader to clarify his position on the Stormont boycott. So what was the mood among the party faithful at this weekend's gathering in Belfast? Gareth Gordon went along to find out.
The DUP leader is no stranger to the ballot box, but does he have an answer to the great devolution puzzle? One man who should know is his brother.
There's no doubt there is pressure on Geoffrey, but Geoffrey is one of the most experienced politicians in Northern Ireland.
Signs of dissent, there were none.
I think the party leadership know what they're doing, and I have trust them to make the right decisions for the people of Northern Ireland.
It would be good to have Stormont back, but you have to have it back on the right circumstances.
We're not going to blink in this. This needs fixed because the consequences of going back too soon and going back without a settlement will be a destroyed part of the union, not a part of the union that's growing and benefiting.
You could read the main speech as a gentle paving of the way for a return, but not yet.
Conference, I still believe in devolved government. This party believes in having locally elected representatives take decisions in the best interests of our people, all our people. But more than that, if we want to make the positive case for the union, then having local institutions that succeed in delivering for everyone in Northern Ireland is an essential element in building our case for the union. To those who argue that direct rule is a better option, I say this. Time and again, Westminster has imposed laws upon us that are not in tune with the needs or the wishes of the people of Northern Ireland. You cannot, on the one hand, repeatedly condemn successive governments for letting us down, and then argue with credibility that we're better off ruled by those very same people who do not really understand what makes this place tick. Such an argument for any unionist to put forward is a nonsense.
It's a speech that went down well. This was the speech of an arch devolutionist, someone who believes the only future lies in Stormont. But as to when the DUP might return to Stormont, there were no clues. If the DUP don't get everything they want, they'll have to make a decision.
Yes, well, we're always going to have to make a decision, but I know that the party leadership is working hard, telling the British government what they say, what it is that we're wanting, and for them then to be able to respond to that. I think that they've taken us for granted for too long and thinking that we're going to turn around and just walk back in and give up.
Under what circumstances do you think the DUP would go back into Stormont?
I think when they get their 7 tests met.
Is that really possible?
I think so.
All eyes remain on the DUP and will do for some time.
Gareth Gordon reporting, and shortly after that speech, the DUP leader sat down with our political editor, Enda McLafferty, who began by asking Sir Geoffrey what he hoped delegates would take away from his conference speech.
Well, we've had a very good conference, Enda. It's great to see the party together again and in really good form. The key messages that I wanted to get across today are first and foremost that we are a devolutionist party. We are committed to getting our political institutions back up and running again. But I also wanted to put down clear markers about what we need in order to rebuild the consensus that has been missing and the harm that was done by the protocol in undermining that consensus and making it clear that we need an outcome that unionists can support, because that is fundamentally important to how power sharing at Stormont functions.
But it did feel as if you were, in a sense, preparing the ground today for some kind of a move back to Stormont.
Well, of course, that's predicated on the basis that we get an agreement that works for Northern Ireland, and that fundamentally is my first objective. Getting Stormont back up and running follows that. It flows from such an agreement, and I was simply bringing our delegates up to date on where we are with that, but also, yes, sending out a very clear message, not just to our own party, but to the wider community, that the DUP remains committed to devolution, to Stormont, and we want to see it working properly, sustainably, and on a stable basis.
Were you also sending a message to London that you're up for devolution in the hope that they might show more flexibility in terms of what's coming down the track by way of whatever agreement you might reach with the government?
Well, I have no doubt that the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister want to see Stormont back up and running. They want to see the Belfast Agreement being implemented in all its parts, but on the basis that unionists can support as well as nationalists. And therefore, my message to London is very clear. We want to work towards getting an agreement, but I also wanted to spell out that what is needed is both legislation and measures to protect our ability to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom.
Now, a few lines jumped out for me today in terms of what you had to say, in a sense preparing that ground that we've already talked upon. You made it very clear. You say that if we make the right choices now, speaking to your delegates, we can secure the union for generations to come. But then you go on to say, but that means being prepared to face up to new realities and adapting to new circumstances. Are you saying now that the party and the people of Northern Ireland are going to have to live with some elements of the Irish Sea border?
No, what I'm saying is that Northern Ireland is changing, notwithstanding the issues around an Irish Sea border, and that unionism must broaden its appeal, and I spelled that out very clearly today. And that part of our campaign, if you like, part of what we need to do as unionists to promote the case for the union, to secure the union, is about making Northern Ireland work. Now, let me be clear, Enda, a key element of that is resolving the issues that have created an Irish Sea border on goods that are travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and staying within the UK. That is the bottom line for us. We need to resolve that.
It was very clear today that you tried to widen this debate out beyond the nuts and bolts of any sort of Irish Sea border or trade agreement between Brussels of what's going to happen along the border, and try to make this about the union. The union's at stake here. That's why devolution is so important, and that's why people should focus there. So it's a case of look over there, but don't look over here.
No, it's not. It's actually about looking at both. What I'm saying is that both are fundamentally important to the future of the union. And having an Irish Sea border on goods that are not, it is not necessary to subject to checks that the EU are demanding, which we do not believe are required, where those goods are not leaving the United Kingdom. They're not a risk to the EU, and therefore we need to deal with that, because that's important. Article 6 of the Acts of Union is about our economic rights as citizens of the UK. So resolving that alongside restoring devolution, the two go hand in hand.
You can say that now, but that wasn't really the central message, I think, that many people took from your speech today. Speaking to some of the delegates emerging from the room a short time ago, they felt that you're now preparing the ground for some kind of a move back to Stormont. So that's how it was read within the room, whatever you say now.
Well, actually, if you read the speech, and it is very clear, a big part of my speech was devoted to the issues around the protocol, the Windsor framework, the fact that that framework falls short of what we needed. So it's all there in black and white.
Well, you only mentioned the 7 tests that the DUP will measure any agreement by just once.
No, I mentioned them twice, actually, in my speech. And that's because the Windsor framework doesn't meet those tests. And what we need to do, Enda, is to bring about a solution that involves arrangements, that respects Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, that protects our ability to trade within the United Kingdom, and then, Enda, and then we can restore devolution.
Whether you like it or not, like a very different Jeffrey Donaldson than the Jeffrey Donaldson who stood on those platforms with Jim Allister and others at those anti-protocol rallies saying not an inch.
No, it's not a different Jeffrey Donaldson. I've been very consistent in my approach on this, and if you look, Enda, at what I said on the 1st of July 2021, on the first day I became leader of the DUP, I spelt out our strategy. I made clear what were our concerns and our objectives, and I have adhered to those, and we are working to find the solution. So I am very clear, and lest some spin be put on what I said, because we have a lot of that in Northern Ireland. I know what's in my mind, Enda, with respect, and I know what I said today, and I know what the emphasis was on. And the emphasis was twofold in terms of building and securing the union. Firstly, we need to resolve the issues around the Windsor Framework and the protocol. That means restoring Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and its internal market. That comes first. And then, when we've resolved those issues, we can restore Stormont on a basis that unionists can support.
You can say all of that, of course, but
I did.
There will be people looking in today to say, we're getting ready here for a U-turn by the DUP.
No.
They will read it as that today, whether you like it or not.
Well, that's a matter for them.
Some of your delegates have already told me that they feel that you're starting to prepare the ground today for some kind of a move. That was their sense coming out of the room.
What I was doing today was making absolutely clear that we as a party want to see the union restored. We want to see Northern Ireland's ability to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom protected in law. And then we want to see Stormont back up and running. And that is very clear. And actually, I talked to a lot of our delegates today as well, and I'm very clear about what their understanding is of the party's position. I'm very clear of the support I have within the party for the stance that we've taken. And not just that, across the unionist electorate as well.
Just on that then, in terms of the level of support that you have, so if you're getting ready for some kind of a move, will you be able to count on the backing of all your party officers for sure? Because we know there are some of them in that group who are a bit concerned about the direction that things are heading in right now.
Well, first of all, let's repeat what I said in my speech, what I actually did say. And that was that, yes, if we get the right agreement, if we can resolve the issues that are of concern to us, all of us, and that's based on proposals unanimously agreed by our party officers, then we're in a position perhaps to say yes. But I also said, Enda, that this party will not be afraid to say no if we don't get what we need. And that's very clear. And on that, our officer team and our party are...
And you do, Sir Geoffrey, feel like a man under pressure right now, a man who knows he's got something to sell to the party, and some of the party may not like it.
Well, I have to tell you, Enda, I don't feel under any pressure. I am very relaxed about the position we are in. I recognise, of course, the huge responsibility that we have as a party to get this right and to get Stormont back up and running on a basis of that cross-community consensus that is essential to making power sharing work. That means I have got to achieve and deliver something that unionists can support. Enda. Now, I know I've got the support of the broad swathe of the unionist electorate. I know I've got the support of my own party, and therefore I don't feel under any particular pressure, except that I want to get this right and I want to get it done.
Explain this for me then. Is Sammy Wilson right whenever he says the Irish Sea border now is up and running? So in other words, two key tests that you have set can now not be met because they're very specific in terms of arrangements cannot constitute an Irish Sea border. So is he right when he says that?
Well, again, as I spelled out in my speech and actually said today, that when it comes to goods that are moving from Great Britain via Northern Ireland into the EU, yes, we will ensure that those goods are checked so that when they enter the EU, they meet the requirements that are laid down.
What about the other lane?
But in terms of goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, I made it clear in my speech today, and it's there in black and white, we do not believe it is right that unnecessary checks are carried out on those goods that constitute a customs border. We do not need a customs border for goods moving within the UK. Sammy and I are of one mind on this.
Those opponents of yours out there looking in saying this is Geoffrey Donaldson now starting to play with words, in other words, to get the ground ready for him to be able to make some kind of compromise. What would you say?
I would say read the speech. And I encourage you to read the speech again, Enda, because I'm not sure you've actually taken on board the clear, distinct message that I have given today. The DUP's position has not changed, and I actually said that in the hall today to applause and support from our party. So I'm sorry, but the BBC are not going to find a story today of division within the DUP.
So in terms of a timeline now, you say that you hope the negotiations will conclude as quickly as possible with the government. What are we talking about here, weeks or months?
Well, look, I want to get this done, and I said in my speech that as quickly as possible were the terms that I used. And we are up for and will continue to engage with the government. We want to get this right. We have been putting our views to the government very clearly. We've been getting responses. As I've said, there remain gaps between us and their position. I want to see those gaps closed because they deal with some very important issues for us. And look, if the government moves quickly to resolve those issues, then we will get to an agreement. But I can't call it in terms of specific timeframes. I'm not working to a deadline, but I do recognise that as we move towards a general election, increasingly the focus of the government will switch to other things. And therefore, I think it's in everyone's interest that we try to resolve these issues in the next few weeks and months.
And what if we don't get an agreement? Where are we then?
Well, I made clear today in my speech that, whilst we want to be in a position to reach an agreement, that we are not afraid to say no if what is on offer falls short of what is needed.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson speaking to Enda McLafferty. Let's reflect on that with my guests today, Professor John Tong and Sam McBride. Welcome to both of you. John, you were at the conference yesterday. Was Sir Geoffrey, in his leader's speech, in spite of what he appeared to be saying to the contrary in that interview, preparing the way for the party to go back to Stormont?
Sir Geoffrey certainly prepared the pitch, but he wasn't ordering his team out of the dressing room necessarily to play on that pitch. I mean, this was Donaldson the devolutionist. This was Donaldson explicitly ruling out direct rule, so we know what his preferred direction of travel is, but we already knew that. What Sir Geoffrey was basically arguing for was to do away with the Green Channel element of the Windsor framework and to have a red channel only. That's a long way from getting rid of the Windsor framework. He was also very, very explicit in his conference programme notes, where he attacked those fringe elements of unionism that were sowing discontent and, to quote him, didn't have the best interests of the union at heart. That, again, was preparing for a parting of the ways with those who dig in and don't want any form of Irish Sea border. So there's a preparing of the pitch. In terms of the timeline, probably the best bet would be on the restoration and devolution in the new year. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson was very clear. He said quite explicitly, look, the parties are moving on. And having been at the Conservative and Labour Party conferences over the last couple of weeks as well, that's quite clear. The Windsor framework is here to stay. There's cross-party consensus on that. And I think Geoffrey Donaldson recognises that.
Sam, if Sir Geoffrey was preparing the way, as so many people seemed to think was the case, why would he subsequently say he wasn't?
I'm not sure. It's a good question. I think that when you look at what he said in the speech and you look at what he said to Enda there, it's almost like Geoffrey Donaldson is arguing with Geoffrey Donaldson. He's arguing both sides of the case. And that's a curious situation if he's now finally starting to prepare his party for compromise. I think that if you were listening to his words or reading his words in Downing Street, in Merrion Street, in Brussels, wherever people might have an interest in this, you would sense weakness in that speech, because he is saying that, yes, it's still important for him to get rid of the Irish Sea border, but what is critical to him is getting devolution back. He needs devolution for the future of the Union, he says. There is no alternative. Direct rule, he says, is a complete disaster. Obviously, he doesn't believe in joint authority. Devolution is the last thing that's there, so he needs to get back in. He hasn't been using that language previously, and suddenly he's saying that he is presenting an image of himself here that's so desperate to get devolution back. The logical position is, therefore, that he's going to have to compromise to get that back because it's so important to him.
John, you talked there about where the party, where Sir Geoffrey in particular, might be on the issue of green lanes. Hard to square that circle. I want to ask you about what he talked about in terms of establishing this East-West Council to copper fasten the Union. Is that the key development, or fig leaf as some people might see it, that he's looking for from the UK government?
I think that will form part of the bundle of consolations that will head the DUP's way to give them political cover to go back in. But that does beg the question, well, what about the British-Irish Council that is there in Strand 3 of the Good Friday Agreement anyway? Is this a bolt-on? Is it an add-on? Is it a replacement for Strand 3? So we didn't get any clarity on that. I mean, Sir Geoffrey's still calling for legislation to protect the UK's place within, Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market. It's almost as if it's been expelled from the internal market. It hasn't been, but obviously in the DUP's view, it needs protecting. Chris Heaton-Harris at the Conservative Party conference did not offer legislation in that sense. He said that he would listen sympathetically to issues relating to the implementation of the Windsor framework. So we're dealing with details now about how the Windsor framework may be modified rather than replaced. I mean, the EU chair of the International Trade Committee only this week said the UK government can legislate on whatever it wants in relation to the Windsor framework, provided that it doesn't contravene that framework. So that's still, the pitch on which we're playing.
Sam, just briefly, if you would, if there is some kind of development as far as an East-West Council is concerned, how would that play with potential Sinn Féin First Minister, with the Irish government, and again, potentially, with a new Labour Prime Minister in Downing Street?
Look, I think whatever about that element of that sort of a situation, it would make no difference to the red line that Sir Geoffrey Donaldson set here. It was very clear, it was very specific, get rid of the Irish sea border. I was surprised at the time he made that red line that it was so robust, that there was so little wriggle room. Now he finds that, and it's a problem for him.
OK, we'll leave it there, folks. We'll speak to you both again at the end of the programme. Thank you for now. So we've heard from the DUP, and one very interested observer of Sir Geoffrey's next move will be the Government of the United States. Let's speak to a key representative of that administration, the US Ambassador to the UK, Jane Hartley. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme today. We appreciate your time. Are you optimistic, having heard Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's speech in Belfast yesterday and his interview with our political editor just now, that the DUP is indeed inching towards returning to devolved government at Stormont?
I just want to congratulate Sir Geoffrey on what seemed to be a successful conference. But I do want to encourage him to keep up his work. It is very important to us, as we've said many times, as we said at the 25th anniversary in Belfast, where I had a speech, and most importantly, President Biden said, we want Stormont up and running. That's important for us. It's mostly important for the people of Northern Ireland. So we would encourage anything that Sir Geoffrey could do to get to that point.
He may find it difficult to deliver on that, given some of the red lines he has laid down, as we've just been hearing from my guests in the studio here. Are you saying that the American administration would encourage him to do whatever is necessary to accept the realities of politics in Northern Ireland and be brave as a leader if that's what it takes?
Well, listen, we are not part of this negotiation. We are not part of the Windsor framework. But we do care about having a functioning government in Northern Ireland, and that would be Stormont. I see it in many different ways, because when I talk to American companies that, are looking at Belfast to invest, Belfast is an amazing community. Northern Ireland's an amazing community. So much human talent, great education system, so much potential. But companies, all companies, including American companies, like political stability. So if you're talking to a CEO and you're encouraging them to look at Northern Ireland, which I do all the time, it would be important to have a sitting government.
Well, that's very interesting, because, of course, we know that Joseph Kennedy III, President Biden's special envoy to Northern Ireland for economic affairs, had a big conference in Northern Ireland a matter of weeks ago. He's due back with, I see him tweeting, 40 companies with a business delegation in a couple of weeks' time. I think you're coming with him on that visit. How close do you think those businesses are to signing on the dotted line and actually investing their cash in Northern Ireland and creating jobs here?
Listen, I'm coming with Joe Kennedy, and it's a fantastic group of companies. It's about 40 companies, as I say. Many of them have not been to Northern Ireland. So it really is meant to showcase what I talked about before, the immense talent pool, the incredible entrepreneurial spirit, the great educational system. I'm actually coming up with a large financial institution from the States to think about what we could do in Northern Ireland in terms of apprentice and training skills for the young people. There's so much opportunity there. And all I do say is, just like any other place, stability is important, and having a government to work with is important, particularly in the long run. So I just encourage Geoffrey. I've met with him many times. He's a wonderful man. I encourage him, keep trying.
Given what is happening elsewhere, Ambassador, from a political point of view, we know the difficulties that there are in the Middle East at the moment. Is it possible that if we don't get our act together in Northern Ireland pretty quickly, the US administration is going to lose patience with here and move on?
No. We'll never lose patience with Northern Ireland. I mean, we are strongly encouraging a sitting government for many, many reasons, what I just said. But we care deeply about Northern Ireland. About a couple of months ago, after the 25th anniversary, Senator George Mitchell came over again, and he stayed with me at Winfield House. And I had many long conversations with him. He's quite ill. He didn't know if he'd be back again. And he was telling me some of the negotiations he did for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement he did at Winfield House. And he said it was the most important achievement of his lifetime. You know, so many Americans believe that. I mean, we care, and we're not part of this discussion, I want to say again, but that's why we are strongly encouraging for the people of Northern Ireland. There is so much opportunity there, a sitting government. Stormont.
Ambassador Hartley, can I just ask you finally what you make of the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar's comments on the Middle East situation? On Thursday night, he said Israel has the right to defend itself, but Israel does not have the right to do wrong. A lot of people are concerned about what's happening with potential Israeli action on the Gaza Strip at the moment. Can you understand where he's coming from?
Well, listen, I think Tony Blinken, our Secretary of State, was quite clear, both when he was in Israel and his his travels in the Mideast. One, Israel absolutely has the right to defend itself. This was a terrorist attack, plain and simple. Children being killed in front of their parents, parents being killed in front of their children, rape, babies being killed. So we stand with Israel. I think the president has made that clear. Tony Blinken has also made it clear that we care deeply about having a humanitarian corridor and that civilians need to be protected.
OK, we need to leave it there. Ambassador Hartley, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just time for a very quick word with Sam McBride and John Tong. Sam, the US government obviously focusing a lot of its time on the unfolding situation in the Middle East, but the ambassador saying there, no matter what happens, it won't lose patience with Northern Ireland.
No, and I mean, look, that's something which straddles administrations, which is bipartisan, etc. But really, I think the American influence on this is significant, but it's not the key issue here. Yes, they can bring investment. Yes, they can bring pressure. Ultimately, Jeffrey Donaldson, as we know, wants to get back in. That's not the issue. The problem isn't even his party, it's his voters. And what can the American government do about that? Not very much.
John, we have 30 seconds. Do you think the Irish and UK governments appear to be on pretty much the same page as far as Israel's conduct in Gaza is concerned?
No, the Irish government is much more sympathetic to the Palestinians, and I think that will remain in place. I think all eyes will now be on the Sinn Féin Ardèche, where, of course, they've been much more linked with the Palestinian cause. That's at the start of November. But I think the UK government stands firmly by Israel, less so the Irish government.
OK. Well, we will be covering that Sinn Féin Ardèche in full, of course, whenever it happens. Need to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us today. That is it for today, but I'll be back with The View on Thursday at the usual time of 10:40 on BBC One. Do join me for that. And if you want to hear more about Jeffrey Donaldson's leadership of the DUP, have a listen to our latest Red Lines podcast. You'll find it on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Have a good day from all of us. Bye-bye.